I was 5 when this happened. I don't recall things in very details, but as I grew up, I realized that things were a lot scarier than I imagined them to be. The story started with my parents going out to the Walmart to shop for the new house they recently bought. They had heard the story before, but then it happened to them, and it was all too overwhelming for them. And my parents, I don't think, still have recovered from the trauma of what happened to them there. My parents were very young when they got married. My mother was 20 and my father 26. They had me a year later. My father got an offer from the better working place, but since my mother wasn't really working in that period, she agreed to moving to a new area. It was better for everyone. It was a new place, and new place brought in new adventures. The thing is, both of my parents were journalists, and they had a really good sense of everything. And parenting was something that they were really stoked about, because between them both, they thought that they could train me to be some prodigal genius the world was been waiting for ever since Einstein. So the first few years of my life were very crucial for them, and there is a slight remembrance of the fact that some of my toys were so technical and had some sort of mathematics involved in order to play with them. They said it was better for me. The more active my temporal lobe or something like that will be, the better I will be with education and stuff. And that is where the things got interesting. They were too psyched about making my life such perfection that it could be the one of a genius. They were too busy in creating things for me that made no sense to me as a child. And then the incident that made them understand that they were doing too much was when they realized that they messed up the simple thing. They were doing a Walmart run for the new house, and they took me with them and decided to put me in the stroller and roam around the store to get the things they needed. And they said they will split in ways to cover more area and get done with the thing as soon as they can, because they had a really strict schedule for everything I did. They put everything on strict time for me. But the good thing was that I was unaware of whatever was going on during that period. My mother said, "You took care of him, I'm going to check the wood aisle." My father said, "I'm going to check out the bed." And in all that, they forgot that I was there, and they both went their way, forgetting and thinking that I am with the other. And they went on with their business, and it wasn't until half an hour when they met at the same aisle, realizing that I am not with either of them. They looked at each other with panic and rushed to the place where they left me, and they saw the stroller. At first they saw the stroller and they were relieved that I was safe, but then when they got near, they realized the stroller was empty. I was not in it. That meant only one thing, that I had been probably taken away, and they decided to call in the people at Walmart to announce, and then they announced that I was kidnapped and the store was shut down, and the guy was sent to the security to check in on the camera, and they found nothing in. But then, right at the time they saw that I was being picked up by an old white lady and she headed down to the back alley, and there was no sign of her in the store, it meant she left. They made no delay in calling the police. The police came in and took the image from the camera, but they were not really the quality images that you can process and put an APB on. They were worried and had no idea where I was and how they could possibly find me. They had to go through the horror of their child being taken away from them in the middle of the world. A day went by, and there was no information about me, and my parents were now thinking of pleading on national television. But then they got a cold call of my kidnapping, and that they need some money in place of the kid. The police cornered the call to be a lie and told my parents there was no legit information about my kidnapping. 5 days, there was no clue. Neither the police had any clue, and it was almost as if I had disappeared from the place. Though the police said that it is tough to trace my steps since I was long gone from the place, and there was a good chance that I would not be found. They were just preparing my parents with the worst that could come, and as it did, they were ready to almost give up, but my mother was not. She was a mathematician and was into probability, and she calculated weirdly something of a root, studying up the cases and calculated a probable scenario to find me, and according to her calculations, the info of my missing was spread through the Walmarts, and then the same setup was done on an undercover mission in New Mexico, where they planted a camera in the stroller in Walmart of New Mexico, and the thing that happened to me there, my mother calculated the pattern. It was the whole gang of these infant stealers. They were caught, and after the intense interrogation and searches, they found me, right on the American-Canadian border. I was all right, and there were no signs of damage. My parents won't stop crying, and since then, they have been overly protective of me. They found me 15 days after my initial missing, and luckily right in time. For if I would have transported in Canada, chances of finding me would have almost disappeared. Since then, they just stopped thinking of everything and became a very hands-on parents and overly protective. As far as Walmart goes, I don't think my parents have entered a Walmart ever since I went missing. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. I was a manager at Target and had a horrible experience with the customer one time. I always found the situation very strange. For the most part, the customers are very pleasant and not at all bad in comparison. In some places, I've worked with the public my entire adult life, and people can be absolutely horrible sometimes. But they are a little bit better at Target. In the few years I've worked there, I never once had to call security or physically escort someone off the premises. I only once ever had to call the police on someone, and I would actually make the case that he was only a target to creep on girls. So I'm not even sure that that really counts, but anyway, I digress. My story with that guy was actually really interesting, and I feel a weird combination of anger and sympathy for this one kid. He must have been about 19 or 20 years old, really tall, one of the weirdest looking kids I've ever seen. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way or anything. He was just really strange looking. It probably made life for him really difficult, so I can at least understand where he was coming from when he did what he did. Absolutely does not justify it or anything, but I can understand him at least, if that makes sense. It all started on a usual afternoon. I had just gotten off the phone with corporate, and if you're wondering, yes, it's always a nightmare. I was looking forward to doing some inventory checks and whatnot for the day. The store had been awfully busy that week. I had a customer who wanted to speak with me. I went out to talk with her, and she told me about an employee who had been inappropriate with her. I guess one of our people was helping her decide on clothes and was standing a little too close to the dressing room door. Honestly, she struck me as a drama queen. I just kind of brushed it off and told her that we would look into it and make sure our employees don't do anything like that again. But when you're a manager, you hear complaints like that all the time, and a good chunk of them are just from people who want to get a free item or discount or something. I got another complaint that day from another customer. This one made me a little bit more intrigued. It was from someone who looked like she came from a wealthy home, probably not looking for a handout here. She said that one of the employees had felt her while she was looking at clothes. Now that set off some alarm bells, because that meant that one of my workers was physically creeping on customers on the job. I told her I would look into it, and I called the meeting before everyone went home. I explained the situation and said that whoever was responsible would come to my office and have a chat with me. I would go easy with them if they admitted to it without forcing me to look into it. My personal philosophy is that people know when they do wrong, and they just want an opportunity to right their wrongs. So I try to give it to them. But everyone went home. No one admitted anything, and that was when it was on. We couldn't look at the security camera footage in the area because all of this had been going down near the dressing rooms. The closest security camera we have is on the outside rack of the clothes, but it doesn't give us very much indication of what's going on near the dressing rooms. I asked one of my favorite employees to keep an eye on that area over there. He told me he would. 2 days went by, and he didn't see anything. I didn't get any more complaints either. Very strange. Of course, it wasn't long before we had another complaint. I asked the woman what this employee looked like. She forgot the name on the tag, but told me it was a tall, skinny guy with weird-looking glasses. And right off the bat, I knew it wasn't anyone on my team. We didn't have a skinny guy with glasses. And immediately, I knew that we were dealing with someone that was pretending to be an employee. I gave a heads up to my team and had everyone on the lookout. I remember getting a text message from one of my female team members. She told me that she spotted someone that looked like that over by the clothing section. I immediately went over to look around, but before I did, I made sure to put on my jacket around my uniform. That way, I wouldn't be obvious that I was a manager looking to bust this guy. I spotted this kid, stood out like a sore thumb. At first, I was worried that it would be dealing with some middle-aged creep. I felt kinda bad when I realized that this was some high school college kid being a weirdo. He was wearing what looked like a Target uniform. If you look closely enough, you could tell it was fake, but I guess the average customer doesn't really know the difference. I walked over to him and asked to see him in my office. The look of terror on his face washed over him in that moment was unforgettable. He wasn't trying to run or anything, and I brought him in and sat him down. From what I could tell, he was an otherwise good kid. He was going to local community college, had good grades, went to church, the whole 9 yards. I asked him why he was doing this, and he said it was because no girls in his college would date him. I tried to explain to him that being a creep to strangers by impersonating a Target employee is not the answer. I told him that I could call the police and have them arrested for what he was doing. I told him I wouldn't though. I know having something like that on your record can really mess your life up, and I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, he hadn't done anything horribly bad in the store. He seemed like he got the memo. Well, he didn't though. Must have been 2 or 3 months later, and I got another report about something like that. Apparently, this woman was looking for a new sweater, and a Target employee kissed her on the cheek. My mind jumped to the only thing I could think of, and I called the police. I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he had dug his own hole here. He was in the same area, doing the same thing as before. I don't know what happened to him after the fact, but what I can tell you is that one of the cops recognized him. I guess this wasn't the only time he was being a creep in a clothing store pretending to be an employee. But other than that one weird kid, people at Target are very okay people. I've worked as a mall Santa for the past few Christmases now. I'm only 33, but thanks to my complete lack of exercise routine, I definitely have the figure for it. And once I have the beard and the wig and hat combo going, there's basically no telling the difference between me and a 60-year-old dude. Mall Santa work can be tough for a few different reasons. Number one, the hours are really long, and the pay can be really terrible depending on which model you manage to get employed by. Number two, the kids can be little monsters, and their parents can be just as terrible on occasion too. But the reason I'm actually considering skipping the entire thing this year and having something of a budget Christmas is that you get some seriously disturbing things happening from time to time. I mean, the kinds of things that keep you up at night, even after a long, exhausting shift. However, the worst thing that's ever happened to me as a mall Santa was actually nothing to do with kids. Parents are terrible, paying hours, and I'm sure you'll see why after I tell you the story. So every year, usually when the mall is required is during weekday mornings, we get specially organized visits from special needs kids or adults with learning disabilities who were bussed in from the surrounding areas. Pretty much every other mall Santa I've spoken to about this agrees that it can be one of the most rewarding parts of the job, and that the adults with learning difficulties are often even more excited about the prospect of meeting Santa. And some of the kids are literally the only downside is that some of them are so heavy that my thighs hurt after having like 50 in a row sit on my lap. But other than that, it's honestly one of the best parts of the job. Last year, I'm in the middle of one of the special sessions when I get this girl coming up and sitting on my lap. I say girl, but she was legitimately a grown woman looking like she was in her mid-30s or something. But she had a mental age of about 9 or 10. All smiles and giggles, way shy about meeting Santa again. It was cute as all get out. But the interaction was not so cute. and turn that way pretty fast. So, like I said, she's all giggles and smiles as she comes up to sit on my lap, and I give her the usual spiel asking her name, how old she is, if she's excited for Christmas, and all that stuff. Then when it comes to asking her what she wants me to bring her on Christmas Eve, she starts thinking about it and smiling at first, before she suddenly gets super serious with a touch of sadness. I'm asking her if she's okay, what the problem is, and she's like shaking her head, acting like she doesn't want to tell me anything. I take the time and explaining that no matter what she asks for, I'll try my very, very best to bring it to her. No matter how big or small it is, that Santa always tries his best to bring good little girls and boys what they ask for on Christmas. She takes a moment. Then the exchange goes a little something like this. You mean it, Santa? He can get me anything I want for Christmas. Anything. Anything you want. Just tell me and I'll do my best. Okay. Well, at this point, she lowers her voice to a whisper and leans into my ear. I want my boyfriend to stop hitting me. Can you make that happen? Was sort of dumbstruck for a second. Like all of the things I thought she was going to ask, that would most definitely not have topped the list. I remember just nodding at first, trying to find the words and being like, go make that happen for you. Sure, no problem. She was so happy to hear that I'd fix it for her and gave me the biggest hug I think I'd ever received while working as a mall Santa. I had to put on a huge smile. And of all the times I've had to fake being jolly and merry, that time with her was the hardest. But I just felt numb, like completely broken by what I'd heard. And I just tried my best to get through the rest of the session without bursting into tears. I remember all these thoughts rushing through my head, terrifying ideas of institutional abuse. She said boyfriend, and that made it extra creepy. Like, sure, it could have been just another guy in her care group or something. Another adult with learning difficulties who she'd hooked up with somehow. But there was nothing to say that it wasn't a member of her care team that was like abusing her in a completely different sense. To not just physically, but, well, catch my drift. So when the session was over, I approached the member of the care team that had organized the trip and accompanied them to the mall. I didn't let anything slip. I just told them how great I thought the session had gone, and that's have a few details about the group that had organized them. As it turned out, they were all from the same care home type thing. So I made a note of the name of the place as well as the name of the girl that it was apparently being abused. That night I couldn't sleep. I just kept picturing some evil monster abusing that poor girl, taking advantage of their position to put some poor special needs woman through torture, then telling her that she'd be killed if she ever breathed a word of it to anyone. And here's where stuff starts getting even more intense. Now, I could have just called 911. With the info I had at hand, registered a general complaint and then heard nothing back about it. Buddy, a buddy of mine, had a cousin with the local police department, and not just some gumshoe B-cop either. They were a detective. It took some convincing, but I convinced my buddy to pass along their cell phone number so I could get in touch with the dude personally. It took a while, but I managed to get through to the guy who sounded pretty skeptical at first and seemed kind of irritated that his cousin had given me this number. But once I explained what the issue was, his tone changed completely. Now, I didn't find this out until way later from my friend, but his cousin had a special needs daughter who was probably going to have to either live with them for the rest of their life or was going to head into a group home at some point so she could have some measure of independence. So when I explained the situation with the special needs girl I met as a mall Santa, it obviously hit the guy right in the feels as the topic was so close to home. The detective tells me that he'll look into it. Thanks for letting him know. I get him to promise to tell me if anything comes up, and he says yes, and we hang up And that was the last I heard of it for like a month. Then, maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Christmas was over the mall. Santa's job was way behind me, and I was back to working my regular hours as a self-employed mechanic. Then I get a call from a number that seems vaguely familiar, although I wasn't quite sure why. Turns out, it was my buddy's detective cousin, who reminded me of the tip that I'd given him about the care company. Of course I remembered, but by that time I really didn't think anything would come of it. But oh, how wrong I was. The detective thanks me for the information, and although he told me he couldn't say too much, he told me to keep an eye out on local media outlets. The next thing I know, it's all over the local papers that there have been a misconduct scandal involving a local care company. I picked up a copy and read the story, only to find out that it's the very same one I had reported. The long and short of it is that the cops had uncovered endemic levels of abuse in the company, stuff that varied from financial discrepancies to straight-up physical abuse. And sickeningly enough, there was even cases of care workers taking advantage of mentally disabled females in ways that were seriously inappropriate. There were numerous arrests, with some of the sleazier and violent criminals looking like they were going to get years in prison for how long they so cruelly taken advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in society. It made me sick to my stomach to read about how some people could bring themselves to do something like that. But it was stopped, and I felt incredible that I'd actually managed to be a part of the chain of events that brought the whole thing crashing down. I just hope that that poor girl, who was obviously pretty traumatized by what was happening to her and just not being able to understand why it was happening, either found some measure of peace after it. And in a way, Santa did kind of bring her exactly what she wanted, even if it wasn't on Christmas Day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a thought that never fails to make me tear up.